Hey everyone, welcome back. We are this morning discussing the message from Mark chapter 8. I didn't preach at Trinity. Jeremiah did. He's not able to join this call, so I'm going to share some insights based on just listening to his sermon. We also have Danny and Dan, two of our regulars here, and a new voice, Joe. Joe was speaking at Blaze Church for Keith. And Joe, welcome. Glad to have you part of this.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Joe, what was it like being in that text thread all week and having to sort through all sorts of messy theology coming from Dan Williams?
No, I enjoyed it. It was really insightful. I think, I've preached at Blaze a few times, and sometimes I find myself, preparing weeks in advance, and sometimes it's kind of crunch time leading up to the week. So in this case, I kind of had my message prepared about 2 weeks out. So it was really cool to see everyone else's insights and what they were drawing from the text and from their study time. So it was great.
That's great, man. Danny, let's start with you. Talk to us a little bit about Mark 8, call to discipleship, really pretty intense text.
Yeah, and that was one of my last week where my biggest worry was the week before was kind of hammer. This week would be kind of a hammer as well. And it definitely was a strong message, but well received. Basically, where I came from was our confessions of Christ will inform our life in Christ. And where I felt it hit the most was in the confession moment where I did a comparison with who do people say you are today? And I said, there's a lot of false versions of Jesus. False versions of Jesus has to heal always. Jesus is all about your happiness, right? And we talked about rejecting those versions of Jesus. There was a moment for me to kind of in a climate in our community to say that Jesus isn't for the left and he isn't for the right. He is the King of Kings. And so to get an accurate depiction of who Jesus is vital. We laid it down as in that would inform everything else about the rest of the book of Mark, and definitely for that chapter. And so if we got the right view of who he was, it was going to inform how we live for him. So if I knew that Jesus was this Messiah, then I would be more willing, I would be more understanding to deny myself, take up my cross, and follow him. Why? Because I'm not following some false version. I'm not following some Jesus who's establishing earthly kingdom. I'm following a Jesus who's going to establish an eternal kingdom, and he's worth following. He's worth sacrificing for. And that's kind of where the crux of what it was yesterday, and it was pretty beautiful.
Yeah,
Maybe not my sermon, but the moment was beautiful.
um, having not prepped this text and just being able to sit back and listen to Jeremiah share it, and being in that text thread and watching you guys process it, it struck me that halfway. This is about the halfway point of Mark's gospel, right? And it feels like Mark has been presenting all these evidences for who Christ is in story form. And now he's kind of starting to say, if you're going to keep moving forward in this story,
Yeah.
you're going to have to understand this because all the good things are true, but all those good things Jesus is doing are things that he is doing on the way to the thing he came to do, right? And Peter's inability to process that or have any framework that could make sense of Jesus' clear language is pretty important in this text, it seemed. Joe, talk to us a little bit about how it was for you at Blaze and what really seemed to help people.
Yeah, it was a great Sunday. I think one of the main pieces of feedback that I heard kind of from folks on the way out is this fact that there's this clear distinction between the gift of salvation and then following Jesus as a disciple. Jesus's call is very direct to his followers. This is not a call for just comfort and ease at all times. This is a daily commitment that we need to deny ourselves, pick up our cross, follow him. So I think what really resonated was this fact that there's no room for part-time disciples. If you're a follower of Christ, you are called to this daily commitment and this daily renewing of, okay, what am I called to do to be a disciple, a follower of Jesus? And I think one one piece of the sermon that really resonated was the the fact that a disciple is not about being a disciple is not about getting into heaven. It's about getting heaven into us. It's about being more like Christ. And I think, one of the main questions we were wrestling with in this sermon is really is there a potential barrier that's preventing us from really pursuing Jesus? Is there something that we've been holding on to that we do need to lay down so that we could fully surrender to God's will? So yeah, it was a great Sunday, and I thought that the sermon really resonated.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. Dan, take us in North Central.
Yeah, I think the traction that we seem to get was around the idea. Well, there's two parts really. I think looking closely at Peter's confession that you are the Messiah, and meaning in his mind, you are the political activist who's going to restore our nation and our hopes and dreams of power over Rome and reestablish your throne, our throne, with you sitting there. And then Jesus comes along and says, "That's actually stop it, Satan. That's the idea of our enemy, is to make my kingdom a political kingdom rather than where winning the battle means I sit on my throne, but in my kingdom, my battle is going to be won on a cross, not on a throne." And then eventually ends up with, and by the way, similar to what you were saying, Dave, if you're going to keep coming with me, we're not going to rise to the throne on earth. We're actually going to give up our lives and lose it. And seem to get some good resonance with Keller's quote that you don't realize Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. And eventually, these disciples are going to be faced with the reality that Jesus is all they have, and then they lose him, and they have to really wrestle through what this kingdom that's breaking in is going to look like with a crucified savior rather than a ruling, conquering king on earth, right? So their hope is in a conquering king for eternity, not a conquering king politically, and that's a tough one for these guys to process, obviously.
Yeah, I was listening yesterday to Jeremiah. I heard him twice, obviously, and his outline was essentially these four words to start with C: the call to follow Jesus, the confession that Peter makes, the cost to follow Jesus, kind of seen it. And Jeremiah did a really good job of bringing out this idea that following Jesus brings opposition, but the
Yeah.
opposition is not always from the world. In
Yeah.
fact, the most important opposition you're going to face if you follow Jesus is Jesus at times looking at you and saying, "Get behind me, Satan."
Mm. Yeah.
And the
He was mentioning
willingness,
that during the week. He did a great job with that.
yeah, the willingness to allow Jesus to oppose us. I remember hearing, it probably was Keller, say, if you read the scriptures in a way that God never confronts you or challenges you or steps on your toes or offends you, you don't have a real God. You have a stepford God, right? You have a God of your own making. And I think Jesus is obviously saying, Peter, I'm not going to be made in your image, and my kingdom's not going to be made in your image. You should be made in mine. And so, and then he ended with the cross of Jesus. And actually last night, Jeremiah led a small group study with our young adults based on his message. I wasn't there, but I asked Jeremiah what really seemed to land. And he said to me the idea of sort of the foreign nature of self-denial in our American culture was something that came up a lot in the young adults discussion. But then also under his last point, the cross, um, he told this story. I'm not going to try and tell it because I won't get it right, but it's basically about a king who was willing to carry the load of a servant, and how when servants carry loads, no one notices them. But when a king does it, everybody notices. And this idea that Jesus is the king who came to carry our burdens and and the cross, and that really, I think, at the end of the message caused our hearts to worship and adore Christ, which of course is, I think, the goal of the sermon. So, yeah, it was good. Any other final thoughts on what feedback you got, or just anything else in the text that what you were thinking about this morning?
I think we all kind of said the same things, and in order to pick up, you got to let go of some stuff. and we have to
Hmm.
deny ourselves in order to pick up that cross. And so we've been saying it too, is drop the things you love for a greater love. That's kind of
That's
been the
good.
similar message in some of the sermons as well, and I think that was an important message too. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that yesterday so much. It was a beautiful time.
Awesome. Well, next week, Mark 9, very different text, very different theme, but a really memorable story. It's going to be a good one, I'm sure. So, hey, Joe, thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for being a blessing to Keith and to Blaze Church. And it was really great to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.